The city hits him before he can even see it. The noise, the smell of salt and trade and crowds that haven't stopped moving in years. 2 harbors, 2 seas, cargo being dragged off ships in every direction, merchants shouting in 6 different languages, money changing hands so fast the air itself seems to vibrate with it. He has just come from Athens. He arrived alone, no money, no contacts, nobody expecting him. He walks into the city, and what he sees stops him. Rising above everything, above the marketplace, above the temple of Apollo with its columns of ancient stone, above the forum that served as the commercial heart of the entire province, there is a rock, a cliff, 575 meters of sheer stone erupting out of the earth, dominating the entire skyline. And at the very top of that rock, there is a temple. He already knows what it is. Everyone does. The temple of Aphrodite, goddess of desire, goddess of union. And this temple, this specific temple, carries a reputation the entire Roman Empire knows by name. For centuries, the temple of Aphrodite had employed over 1,000 sacred prostitutes. The city had grown wealthy on it. Ships made detours to stop here. Sailors spent their entire wages inside those walls. That reputation had never left. It was baked into the language, baked into the proverbs, baked into what everyone in the ancient world already believed about this place. There was even a saying every traveler knew before they arrived. Not for every man is the voyage to Corinth. It wasn't the warning about the sea. The Greek language, the very language this man reads and writes and thinks in, had coined a word from this city's name, Corinthiastazai. To give yourself completely over to sexual excess, to treat the body as something with no meaning and no consequence. When you wanted to describe someone who had abandoned themselves entirely to that life, you didn't reach for an adjective. You just said they were living like a Corinthian. This is what he is standing inside. He finds work as a tent maker. He begins speaking in the synagogue on the Sabbath. Some people believe a church is born right here, inside this city, surrounded by all of this. But the people in that church are not coming from somewhere else. They grew up here. They were formed here. They worshipped in those temples before they ever heard his message. And some of them, quietly, without fully understanding why it was wrong, are still going back. Not because they don't believe, because they genuinely don't see the problem. In Corinth, the body and the spirit were kept in separate rooms. What you did with one had nothing to do with the other. Going to the temple of Aphrodite was as ordinary as going to the market. It was not considered shameful. It was not considered broken. In Corinth, it was considered worship. So he sits down and writes them a letter. And inside that letter, in the middle of one of the most uncomfortable chapters he ever put his name to, he places a single sentence that was meant to answer a question they hadn't even known to ask. Flee sexual immorality. Every other sin a man commits is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. His name was Paul, and that sentence, that one precise, surgical, categorically different sentence is what we are here to understand today. Most people who know this verse have read it dozens of times, and most people have never stopped to ask the real question underneath it. Paul doesn't just say sexual sin is wrong. Every sin is wrong. He says this sin is categorically different from every other sin a human being can commit. Every other sin is outside the body. But this one, this specific category is against your own body, against your own self, against the interior of you. That distinction is not decorative. Paul was not adding drama for effect. Every word in his letters was chosen. Every contrast was intentional. And when he makes a separation this sharp and this surgical, there is something underneath it waiting to be found. So let's find it. To understand what Paul is doing in verse 18, you have to go back much further than Corinth, further than Paul, further than Moses, back to a garden. 2 people, man and woman. The world was new, creation still settling into itself. And in that newness, God said something so simple and so far-reaching that every major book of the Bible quotes it back to itself across thousands of years. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Genesis 2:24. Two words in that verse carry the entire weight. Hold fast. In the Hebrew, the word is dabak. It means to cling, to cleave, to adhere at the point of identity. This is not warmth. This is not affection. This is not two people who like each other very much. This is merger. The same word is used when Ruth says to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die." That is dabak. Two lives becoming so entangled that the boundary between them dissolves. And the result, one flesh. Not one emotion, not one romantic feeling that fades by Tuesday. One flesh. A new combined reality that did not exist before. Two persons who were separate becoming something that Scripture calls a single thing. Now hold on to that, because here is where everything changes. Paul lifts that phrase, one flesh, out of the garden and drops it into the most uncomfortable passage in any of his letters. Do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her? For as it is written, the two will become one flesh. 1 Corinthians 6:16. Stop there. He is not talking about marriage. He is talking about the most anonymous, loveless, transactional form of sexual encounter imaginable. And he is saying, without apology, that the same spiritual mechanics that apply inside a covenant marriage apply here too. The union forms regardless of the relationship. The bond exists regardless of the intention. Something is transferred whether you planned it or not. This is the first key. And it is the key most people walk straight past. The word Paul uses for the sin itself is porneia. We translate it as sexual immorality, but the Greek carries more weight than our translation captures. Porneia was the specific category of sexual acts that happened outside of covenant. Sex without commitment, sex without permanence, sex outside the God-designed container of marriage. It was the category of acts that treated another person's body and your own as a resource to be consumed, rather than a person to be known. And of porneia, Paul says something he says of no other sin on earth. He says it is eis to idion soma, against your own body, against your own self, against the interior. Every other sin, he's explicit, is ektos to soma, outside the body. A man who steals reaches outward. A man who lies speaks outward. A man who murders acts outward toward another person. But the man who commits porneia turns inward, and he does damage in a place no other sin can reach. The question is still what place and what damage. Now watch what happens. When God said one flesh, he was not writing poetry. He was describing a mechanism. The human body was built to bond. On a biological level, the act of sexual union triggers systems in the brain designed for deep, lasting attachment. The chemicals released in that moment were not designed to fade quickly. They were designed to bind, to mark, to tether two people together in a way the body is not built to easily undo. But it goes further than biology. The one flesh of Genesis is not describing what happens in the brain. It is describing what happens in the soul. When two people unite in the way God designed, something of each person crosses into the other. Not just a memory, not just an experience, something of the self, the inner life, the emotional history, the identity is shared, brought across, deposited. In a marriage, this is the design. Over years and decades, two people slowly becoming one, their histories braiding together, their joys and wounds overlapping, each one carrying something of the other that deepens and enriches rather than diminishes. But here is what most people never fully reckon with. When that same act happens outside of covenant, when it happens between two people with no binding commitment, no permanent union before God, the spiritual mechanics do not switch off. The union still forms. The transfer still happens. Something of that other person comes into you, and something of you goes out to them. The bond is real even when the relationship is not, and you are not just carrying their memory. You are carrying something of them. This is exactly what Paul is pointing toward when he built his parallel in verse 17. Right after saying that joining yourself to another person sexually makes you one body with them, he says this, "But whoever is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him." Did you catch the architecture of what he just built? Two columns side by side. On one side, joined to a person in sexual union, you become one body, one flesh with them. On the other, joined to the Lord, you become one spirit with him. The joining works the same way in both directions. Just as union with Christ means you begin to carry his nature, his spirit taking up residence in you, his character shaping your desires, his history becoming your inheritance, union through porneia means you carry something of the person you were joined to, their history, their wounds, their unresolved hungers, their accumulated spiritual weight. All of it comes with the bond. And here's the part nobody talks about. God gave you a soul, a self, a unique inner life with its own desires, its own capacity to feel, its own ability to choose. And he gave you a measure of grace sufficient to govern that self. Paul calls it self-control in Galatians 5:23, the spirit-empowered capacity to manage the person you were created to be. But when sexual union outside of covenant forms that one-flesh bond, something shifts. You are no longer governing just yourself. You are now carrying something of another person's inner life inside your own, their accumulated desires, their unresolved needs, their history of bonding, and all the weight that comes attached to it. You begin to desire things you never used to desire. You feel pulled in directions you don't recognize as your own. Your emotions become harder to locate. Your own voice gets lost in the noise, because the house inside you is getting crowded, and the crowd does not stay quiet. Every new bond adds another layer, another set of needs seeking to be met, another hunger competing for attention. Satisfaction never arrives, not because you are weak, but because every new union brings another soul into the house, and that soul immediately begins to crave what souls crave, another connection, another companion. So the pull comes again, and again, and again. You are given enough grace to govern one life. You are now trying to manage a crowd. This is not a character flaw. This is not weakness. This is what happens when the design is violated. This is why the cycle feels impossible to break from the inside. This is why the man at 3 in the morning lies there fighting a war that feels like it belongs to someone else. Because, in a very real sense, some of it does, and it gets deeper. This is why Paul uses the exact word he uses, flee, not resist. Not fight harder, not add more accountability, not discipline yourself more aggressively. Flee. The Greek word is phugo. Flee, escape, run. Paul doesn't say step away. He doesn't say keep your distance. He says run. Put maximum distance between yourself and this, because this is not a battle you win by standing your ground. The further you are from it, the less you carry. The closer you get, the heavier the weight becomes. But here is the hope, real hope, not the kind that fades by morning. Paul does not leave us in the diagnosis. He delivers it on the way to the rescue. Look at what he says in verses 19 and 20. Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. Two things in that passage deserve to stop us cold. The first is the word he uses for temple. In Greek, there were two different words for the temple in Jerusalem. The first was hieron, which referred to the entire temple complex, the outer courts, the gates, the public spaces. Any Jew or Gentile could enter the hieron, but Paul doesn't use that word. He uses naos. The naos was the inner sanctuary, the restricted space where only consecrated priests could enter to serve, set apart from everything outside its walls. And within the naos, at its most sacred heart, sat the Holy of Holies, the place so sacred that only the high priest himself entered, once a year, on the Day of Atonement, with blood. Paul is saying your body is not the outer court, your body is the naos. When sexual sin enters that place, when porneia enters the inner sanctuary, it is not just a personal failure. It is a desecration of the dwelling place of God. This is why it is different from every other sin. Other sins may affect the outer courts. This one penetrates the sanctuary. The second thing that should stop us is the word bought, agorazo, the language of the ancient marketplace, specifically the slave market, the act of purchasing someone out of an ownership that was never rightful, bringing them out of bondage into true belonging. Paul is making a declaration over your body. Your body does not belong to its compulsions. It does not belong to the bonds it formed outside of covenant. It does not belong to every soul that attached itself to it in the wrong season. It belongs to the one who paid for it. And the price he paid was not silver or gold or a legal transaction. It was a body, his body, given, his blood poured out. Let me pause here, because I know some of you reading this right now aren't processing this as theology. You're reading it as your story. If something in what you've just heard has put a name on something you've been carrying but couldn't articulate, drop something in the comments. Just a word, yes, or heard, or even just a full stop. Because this is a conversation the church hasn't always known how to have at this depth, and the silence around it has kept people locked in cycles they couldn't understand and couldn't name. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because this is a conversation worth continuing. Here is where the church has often fallen short. We have treated this primarily as a moral problem with a behavioral solution. Try harder. Commit again. Sign the accountability contract. Build a higher fence. None of that is wrong, but none of it is enough, because willpower cannot reach the level at which the damage occurred. You cannot decide yourself out of a spiritual bond. You cannot discipline away something that formed at the deepest level of your being, in the nos, in the inner sanctuary, in the place where the self is made. What formed spiritually requires a spiritual solution. This is what the passage is building toward. The body is a temple, and when a temple has been desecrated, it does not restore itself. Someone must come in with authority over every bond, every connection, every soul that took up residence where it did not belong. Restoration begins with disconnection, and disconnection is not a human work. It is a divine one. God has grace for this. This is available to anyone who pursues it, not just seeks information about it, not just understands it intellectually, but genuinely and persistently seeks the God who reclaims what belongs to him. The connections formed in the spirit, and the God of your spirit is greater than everything that attached itself to you in the wrong season. Now let me gather every thread we have followed. We stood in Corinth. We saw what Paul walked into. A city that had built an entire economy and an entire religion around the act of sexual union. A city that had coined a word in its own name for excess. A church full of people who genuinely did not understand why this was different. We went to the garden, one flesh, dabak, the spiritual mechanics of union that God designed. Mechanics that do not turn off because the context changes. We followed Paul into the most uncomfortable territory in his letters, porneia. Sinning against your own body, not just morally wrong, structurally different, because this sin does what no other sin does. It enters the nous, it reaches the inner sanctuary, it forms a bond that persists after the moment ends. We discovered the transfer, something of another person that comes across with the union, the crowd that grows, the noise that multiplies, the self that gets lost in the weight of souls it was never designed to carry. We saw the parallel Paul builds. Joined to the Lord, you become one spirit with him. Joined in porneia, you become one flesh with them. The joining works in both directions, and the only way out of a wrong bond is through a greater one. And we heard the rescue, agarazo, bought, the body that no longer belongs to its history, but to the one who paid for it. That is the answer to the question. That is why this sin is different, because it is not merely an act, it is an entry. It is an unlocking of something in the interior of a person that was designed to open only in the right context for the right person under the right covenant. When it opens in the wrong place, the interior is compromised, the house gets crowded, the self gets confused, and only the one who designed the interior can restore it. Paul does not end this passage with condemnation. He ends it with a call. Glorify God in your body. Not be ashamed of your body. Not your body is the enemy. Not your body is beyond recovery. Glorify God in your body. The sight of the wound is the sight of the redemption. This is how God has always worked. He does not build a detour around the broken place. He walks directly into it. He restores from the inside out. There was a woman at a well in John 4. She had been through 5 husbands and was living outside of covenant with a 6th man. The weight she carried, the accumulated bonds, the years of joining and breaking, the soul that had been connected to too many places for too long, all of it was visible to Jesus before she spoke a word. He did not avoid the conversation. He sat down at the well. He knew everything. And he offered her what she had been searching for in every face and every relationship she had ever walked into: living water. a satisfaction that does not create more thirst, a belonging that does not deplete, a connection that fills rather than multiplies the hunger. He did not ask her to clean herself up and return when she was more presentable. He offered the water while she was still holding her empty jar. Maybe that is where you are right now. Not reading this as doctrine, reading this as your life. Maybe you've been carrying something too heavy for one person because it was never just one person's weight. Maybe the interior has been so crowded for so long that you have forgotten what your own voice actually sounds like. Maybe you have tried to stop, sincerely and repeatedly, and could not understand why the pull was stronger than your resolve. Now you know why. Not so you can feel defeated by the knowledge, so you can finally understand what you are actually up against, and understand that the one who designed you has already gone into the center of this fight, and he came out the other side alive. Christ came in a body. Sit with that for a moment. The eternal God who exists outside of matter and time and space, he took on human flesh. He was tired, he was hungry, he wept, he bled, he died in a body. Not above it, not around it, in it. And when he rose from the dead, he rose in that body, still bearing the wounds, but alive. He redeemed human flesh from the inside. He entered the nous and walked out of it whole, which means the deepest place of your damage, the innermost room, the place no other sin could reach, is not beyond the reach of what he accomplished. He bought the whole house, not just the presentable rooms, every room, including the ones you've kept locked, including the ones where the crowd has been living for years without permission. His authority reaches there. His purchase covers that. His work is not only forgiveness for what was done, it is restoration of what was lost.